Good evening and welcome to tonight's virtual in conversation program. My name is Christy McMillan and I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum. As most of you know, over the last year, the museum shifted much of our programming to the virtual realm. As the pandemic progresses, we'll continue to offer virtual programs in addition to reintegrating live programs in the museum back into our calendar. We've missed engaging with you in the galleries, but one silver lining that has come from this time of art has been the opportunity to bring to the museum folks near and far from Asheville, Western North Carolina, across the state, country, and around the world, and to feature special guests that we might not have been able to in pre-COVID times. This chance opens up our ability to richly interpret the artwork in our collection and special exhibitions through a range of voices and points of view. This month, we're thrilled to welcome Benjamin Dimmitt and Matt McCarthy in conjunction with the museum's current exhibition, Public Domain, Photography and the Preservation of Public Lands, which is on view in the museum's Van Winkle Law Firm Gallery on the the level 1 landing through September 27th. The photographic work of Asheville resident Benjamin Dimmitt, a native Floridian, investigates interdependence, competition, survival, and mortality in the natural environment. Benjamin's photographs have been exhibited in museums, galleries, and festivals throughout the US and around the world. His work is held in numerous major museums and private collections. Matt McCarthy, PhD, is currently working as a research associate scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. With a doctorate and a graduate degree in oceanography and a background in oceanographic remote sensing, Matt has expertise in coastal, terrestrial, and open ocean environmental science, especially studying the effects of sea level rise, tropical storms, and climate change more broadly on coastal ecosystems. He has led research projects at Oak Ridge and the University of South Florida with funding from the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration to map and monitor diverse environmental and anthropogenic sectors from coral reefs and mangroves to public health drivers and land cover change using state-of-the-art satellites to monitor Earth processes. The University of Georgia Press will publish a book of Benjamin's work in late 2022 that will include Matt's study on coastal deforestation in Florida. Benjamin and Matt will be joined in conversation this evening by Hilary Schroeder, the museum's assistant curator and curator of public domain, photography, and the preservation of public lands. Hilary began with the museum in 2018 as a curatorial assistant and the Loose project coordinator, managing the reinstallation of the collection for the museum's 2019 reopening. In addition to public domain, she has curated several exhibitions at the museum, including Reverberations, Exploring Movement in the Collection, and our upcoming exhibition, A Living Language, Cherokee Syllabary and Contemporary Art. She served as the site curator for Dancing Atoms, Barbara Morgan Photographs, Vantage Points, Contemporary Photography from the Whitney Museum of American Art, and Buford Delaney's Metamorphosis into Freedom. Raised near Athens, Georgia, she received an undergraduate degree in art history from Macalester College and a graduate degree in art history from the University of Georgia. During the program, please add any questions or comments that you have in the chat box. We'll incorporate your questions throughout the program as part of the conversation. Now, please join me in welcoming Benjamin Dimmitt, Matt McCarthy, and Hilary Schroeder.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're having a bit of a climate-related weather event ourselves up here in Western North Carolina. So just want to acknowledge the importance of the conversation that we are going to have tonight. A lot of things happening in the world. Give me just a second to get my slideshow going. I'm going to start us off tonight with an overview, a little bit of a walkthrough, an introduction to the exhibition itself, just to give you the context of, is that a little better, Christy? How's that? Can y'all hear me? Cool. I'm not in my normal setting because of the current weather event that we are having here. So
So
let
you're
me,
fading in and out quite a bit.
okay. Is it better if I use this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let me get my screen shared. And so I'm going to start us off with a bit of an overview of the exhibition. And then I am going to turn it over to Benjamin and Matt to talk about their work before we go into a bit of a conversation between the two of them that I'll moderate and ask any questions that the audience has as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you could just get as close as you can to the microphone on the top of the screen.
How's that?
Better.
Okay, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm normally very set up for these kinds of things. So first I want to acknowledge that I'm talking about public lands in this exhibition. And the museum is situated on the ancestral homeland of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, where many of those folks still reside today. So in talking about public lands, I think it's important to acknowledge some of the things that have happened in terms of public lands over the years. So the exhibition is a little bit about both the good things and some of the not so good things that have happened through federal land and state land management. So we're going to do a little bit of a walkthrough of the exhibition, and then we will stop and look at a couple of key photographs in the exhibition itself. So it's in a rather small space, but I think a nice intimate space to really contemplate the images that are in the exhibition. It is all photography. And the idea for this exhibition really came about through a gift of works by Robert Glenn Ketchum. So you can see a few of them here. And another two here. And then sort of another view there. And I'm going to kind of flip to one to talk about the exhibition for a moment and its origins. So Robert Glenn Ketchum is a photographer who is well known for his work in color photography that is purposefully working as a form of activism to question the way that land is cared for, the way that it is used when it is held in public trust. And this series in particular that I focused on from a recent gift to the museum looks at a series of images from the Cuyahoga Valley National Park area that really questioned whether or not, some of these things that we see are always what we think they are. And so this image in particular that I've pulled out here, you'll notice all of these beautiful daffodils, and it was one of those images that really struck me from the very start as being really beautiful. But as I started to research the materials, I learned that this image was actually once a cleared site in the forest that had then been, homesteaded. Someone had planted these flowers, and if you know anything about bulbs, you know that they like to spread over time. And so this once wild area, though it has returned to some level of being used as this national recreation and park site, has still these many signs of its past uses. And I thought that it was particularly interesting to call out this series this year because it is the 75th anniversary of this particular Department of the Interior office, the Bureau of Land Management. And Cuyahoga Valley is kind of an interesting case study in which to consider this particular relationship between the government and the land. Cuyahoga Valley is an area that's situated between two metropolitan sites, and there are many different ways that the land is used. It's not all just pristine, beautiful, go out and see it, national park. It's got other areas in which there are various uses like some forest regrowth and clearing, animals and land agricultural uses. And one of the things that this area is particularly known for is a dump that was on what was eventually acquired to be property for the site. And they started cleanup in 1986 when a bunch of park rangers started to get sick. It was a Superfund site, and they only finished cleanup about 7 or 8 months ago in December of 2020. So kind of ongoing questions around how land is used and how it's made available to us through public management, but that it's, that we have sort of this calling to be stewards to the land. And these artists, including Benjamin, who's joining us tonight, are really an active part in this conversation. I hope that sort of what we arrive at is the importance of both the science and the art and how they serve each other. One of the other things that I really wanted to focus on in this exhibition is both the region here in Asheville and North Carolina, because we are so well known for all of the lovely reasons that people come to experience outdoor things. We've got Pisgah National Forest, we've got the Blue Ridge Parkway, all of these amazing areas. And so, looking at these 3 photographs by Timothy McCoy that really trace things from the Great Smoky Mountain National Park all the way to the sort of end of the river and the watershed at the Georgia coast, and then looking to things that are sort of more national too, to the West Coast. And so this view here of the gallery, you kind of get a sense of all of those different variations upon landscapes and these federally managed lands. And I want to call out here 2 particular views to kind of highlight that. On the top is a photograph by Benjamin Porter that is overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. So these gorgeous mountains that so many people are now moving to North Carolina to sort of experience now that they're able to work from home. Against Peter Walk's view of Yosemite National Park here, which really kind of pulls into a really interesting detail, this perspective of some of those classic geological features. And really just, again, hopefully takes you out of your everyday rush and hustle and bustle and allows you to appreciate the beauty of our natural landscape while also considering the importance of these areas. So just another view of the gallery. And then this is an important juxtaposition in the exhibition for me. On the left, we've got this beautiful photograph by George Massa. George Massa was a Japanese-American photographer who was working here in Western North Carolina, and he was truly instrumental in the case to make Great Smoky Mountains National Park a park before it became one. So one of those very early activists who were part of that conversation that convinced the federal government of the importance of protecting these areas, of making them available to people for public use, for recreation, for hiking, for natural resources, and all of these other purposes. And so in 1920, he was out there hiking and working with map makers and environmentalists and taking these photographs to present as sort of a case to the government. And they're also really gorgeous, beautiful records of our historic landscape here in Western North Carolina. And nearby them is Benjamin's work, who joins us tonight. Benjamin is working 100 years later in a very similar fashion, with this eye towards what it means to live among these beautiful, amazing landscapes that are so ancient and yet so fragile. And I am looking forward to hearing Benjamin speak about his work. He's going to give you a lot of insight into it, and then having Matt present on some of the data. I feel like a lot of things that I really love are coming together tonight. I am the child of a geologist. Hi, Dad. He's joining us tonight, and have spent time, learning about some of these things that relate to our ecological changes and environment. And there's something that I really am interested in how they play out within our visual record, and what artists are doing and the way that they are impacting things. So hopefully that's a pretty good overview of the exhibition. There's a little trio of Benjamin's work as installed, and you're going to get some great looks at these in his presentation in just a moment. And I think unless there are any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Benjamin.
Thank you, Hilary. All right, Benjamin, here's the moment of truth.
Mute.
There you go.
I'm going to press on my slideshow and share it. How'd I do, Christy?
Just swap displays.
I know how to do that.
Perfection, sir.
Awesome. I'll just start out with an overview. The Chansawitzka National Wildlife Refuge is a 31,000 acre federally owned wildlife refuge that was created in 1943. It is about 70 miles north of Tampa on Florida's Gulf Coast. I first visited there in 1977 with my brother, Richard, who's in the house, and a friend to fish. And I've photographed there for more than 35 years to help illustrate the progress of the sea level rise. I've combined what Hilary was showing you, a newer photograph with an older photograph of the same place. This is one of the main creeks off of the Chassahowitzka River, and the image on the left, I'm not obsessed with dates or getting a date. But I will, on these diptychs, I will give you the dates so that you have an idea of the progress of the saltwater intrusion. The one on the left is 1988, and the image on the right is 2014. The coastal inundation there is caused by climate change and rising sea levels. Additionally, underregulated pumping from the aquifer for the 1,000 people a day who move to Florida has allowed saltwater to move up into the creeks even faster. One thing that's helpful to know about this area is that from Tarpon Springs up around the coast to St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge up in the Panhandle, coastline is a flat plateau, limestone plateau. So there is no beach and nothing to break the Gulf of Mexico's flow into the interior. So this area in the wildlife refuge is just springs going out into open bays, which then mix with the Gulf. And if the seas are rising, that water, that salt water pushes the itself, works its way back up into the creeks. This is, I'll just move on to the next slide. This is the, on the left, 1977, on the right is 2017. The, in addition to the saltwater moving in and sea levels are rising, take my word for it, the state is authorizing an incredible amount of pumping of water for the reservoir. And if you take the fresh water out of these spring-fed estuaries, the salt water comes in a lot faster. And Matt will talk about when saltwater encroachment really started to pick up, and that was around the period when certain water from the aquifer was given to certain places inland. But we have the same cabin built in a shady forest back in the mid-'80s. Obviously that forest is gone now, and because you're seeing a few palm trees, it doesn't mean the place is still lively and perky. The palm trees are the most salt tolerant trees in this ecosystem, and they're the last to expire. The dates on this one are 1988 And the image on the right is 2020, so last year. And this is again, Crawford Creek. It is, for doing these diptychs has become increasingly difficult because it's hard to find the exact same view when rephotographing these landscapes. And the reason for that is there aren't any mountains here or things to orient yourself or be able to put yourself back in a spot that you were in 30 years ago. So you rely on trees, and unfortunately the trees are dying. This was an easy one to rephotograph. The image on the left is 1986, and the image on the right is last year, 2020. I photographed these views from a boat shed roof. I really like this perspective. The forest has become semi-transparent. The image on the left is 2006, and on the right is this year. I shot this in March. This is one of the diptychs that's in the exhibit. It has become difficult for me to work on these images and personally to work on them and to track the decline of my native landscape. This is this Florida estuary and coastline was imprinted on me at an early age, and it's difficult to watch this happen to it. I began concentrating my efforts on the environmental impact of the rising seas back in 2014. I hadn't been to the swamp for a couple of years and was shocked by the ecosystem loss. I looked back at my negatives made prior to 2014, and there is evidence of saltwater intrusion and poisoning going back to 2010. This was something that struck me. I shot it in 2015. Yeah. When I reached out to scientists in 2015 to learn more about the damage that I was photographing, I was told that the saltwater intrusion was widespread all along Florida's Big Bend coastline, from Weeki Wachee up to St. Mark's in the Panhandle. It was at this point that I decided that I wanted to just focus on the Chassahowitzka. It's an area that I know well and love, and I did not attempt to do some whole survey showing how this phenomena looks in lots of different places. Staying in this one area and photographing this place intimately allowed me to see the changes and make the rephotographic diptychs a little bit easier, because I could get there, paddle or walk around and see how what a scene looked like now. And I would carry all the images on my phone and try and line them up, old images on my phone, and try and line them up in the present. Matt was one of the people that I ended up reaching out to, and that's how we began our working relationship. There's another factor here that doesn't actually have to do with climate change, but it's relevant. And the lower right corner of this photograph is some funky stuff, which is actually seaweed. Excuse me, not seaweed, it is algae. It looks like seaweed. Toxic algae now grows in these creeks that were once clear blue. It's the result of agricultural, mining, and cattle waste, along with fertilizer that seeps into the aquifer. All these add nitrogen to the creeks, which then stimulates the algae growth. Large mats of this algae end up blocking sunlight and eventually choke the life out of the shallow creeks. It's pretty much a death knell for smaller creeks and is a big problem all over the state in fresh water. I don't have a horror story about this. I just have watched this forest surrounding these two trees drop into the swamp for the last 7 years, and the two of them continue to hold each other up, one leaning into the other. Storms have gone through and they're still there. I chuckle that if I were an abstract expressionist, I couldn't have drawn this any better. A retired photographer friend built a stilt house in, again, another shady forest on the river to escape the summer heat in St. Petersburg. When I was making this photograph, or photographing around his house in 2015, he gestured up at these dead trees and said, "This is all that's left of my canopy." And I went back last year, and almost all of this is gone now. Back in the day, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, you could paddle up the creeks to the springs that feed the creeks, and you would, it would be just more and more beautiful because you're approaching the vent or the spring head, the crack in the limestone where water is coming right out, and it just works its way on downstream. Nowadays, you get a little, you can get close, but you're never, you still get these reminders that nothing is stopping the coastal inundation. This is pretty far up Crawford Creek, for those of you who might have been up there before. This still life spoke to me back in 2014 when I was seeing the devastation up close for the first time. I realized then that I was going to have to learn to shoot from the canoe without a tripod and cable release in order to get the photographs I wanted. If I wanted to get, if I got out of the canoe in this particular spot up Blue Run, I would sink into muck probably up to my hips. I learned really early on not to stay in the canoe unless I could see the bottom, and confirm that the bottom was firm. Oh, sorry, we're getting tornado. Oh, yeah, sorry, more tornado warnings. Sorry, yes. So I learned when to get in the water and when not to. There are some places where I can get out and walk around, and there's a little island that's about 10 inches above sea level or high tide. And it's nice to be able to walk around with the gear I need and not have to worry about falling into the water or getting wet or the rest of it. I made this photograph in 2016, and it's an oak tree, and it's just now dropped into the sawgrass on my last visit. The sawgrass prairie in the background will be visible in Matt's aerial photographs. This is an area also known as the Serengeti because it's open sawgrass prairie. When I am walking around on islands or paddling along at the shore, sorry. Here we go. I'm going to put it in the garbage can.
Sorry, we've had terrible weather all day with this storm passing over.
If I'm paddling around or walking around and I see something like this, I it does not make me feel real good. These, I'm reminded when I see these, this is a palm sapling that did not live more than a few years before it just expired and flattened right out. And what that indicates is that there are no new young trees growing. The water had salt water has just saturated all the rich soil muck that is there that is now getting saturated. In the winter, this can be a common sight in the mornings. It's kind of pretty, and but it still does show us something. The spring-fed creek is always around 70 degrees. The overnight temperatures can be in the winter in the 40s and 50s, and the humidity is usually high. So I will get up and get out in the morning and shoot when I can. And that fallen palm tree has been there for a couple of years and is now hosting some grasses. It was suggested that we include some process photographs, so I have just a few to end with here. This is the way we're supposed to work with a tripod and shutter release cable. It gives us, or gives the photographer, the most control over the photographic variables, shutter speed, aperture, depth of field, that sort of thing, and is standard practice for landscape photographers. In this case, I obviously can see the creek bottom and confirm that it is good solid sand. And this was, I think, shot maybe 2012. And yeah, the water really was that color and it really was that clear. That was a nice spot way up Crawford Creek. This is photographing from the canoe while hand holding a heavy medium format camera. This is less than ideal. There's camera shake, wind, current, movement by individuals in the canoe, all to be concerned with. I had already experimented with high-speed film before I started this project, so I found that helps me a lot. It still is limiting, but I enjoy it because it's like shooting from the hip. It's not extremely deliberate. You just get the shot and move on. I've recently observed that the majority of the photographs in my book were shot this way. So there's a lot to be said for it. I had a heart-poundingly close encounter with an alligator quite a few years ago that was the size of my canoe. I paddled over the creekside, got out onto dry land to take some deep breaths. And when I did, this is what I saw. I got set up to shoot, went back to the camera to get something that I'd forgotten, and saw the scene in the left photograph. I was all set up, so I took a quick shot with my digital camera. The image on the right, the black and white photograph, is the shot I was after. And I've been pleased with that, and always think about that alligator when I look at this photograph. This is my darkroom here in Asheville, where, as I say, all the magic happens. My first, just to make me feel really old, my first darkroom experiences were at college in 1972. And last image from me, this is paddling back to the cabin at the end of the day with my gearboxes and tripod, and 2011, I believe. And I looked closely at this when I had it in my, up in Photoshop. And you can see the beginnings of the effects of the saltwater intrusion even then. That's everything I have, Christy.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. So I think that Matt is going to now talk to us about the science of what we're looking at. And then we will have Hilary, Benjamin, and Matt join in on a conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, sir. Everything looks great.
Great, thanks. Well, I am not an artist. I never was very good at drawing, painting, photographing, singing, playing an instrument, but I'm okay with the science. And as Christy mentioned, I earned my master's and PhD in oceanography, and I was working on a satellite-based assessment of sea level rise and coastal forest change in Florida while I was a postdoc at the University of South Florida in Tampa Bay. I'm originally from Florida, and I spent a lot of my time in the Big Bend region, so I knew that the area is largely undeveloped, low-lying, and heavily forested. Its remote location seemed to keep it rather well protected from human influences that were impacting other areas of Florida's coast. But it took Benjamin's artistic endeavors to alert me to the problem of forest die-off. Now, it's well known that sea level rise is one of the most consistent and impending threats of climate change in coastal regions throughout the world. What is not well understood is how rising seas will impact various coastal environments and at what rate, especially when considering variations in local topography, habitat, built environment surfaces, as well as any interventions we pursue like beach nourishment or seawalls. And given its remote nature, the Big Bend is an interesting region to study for the effects of sea level rise, but it really would not have happened without Benjamin's work. As you've seen already in Benjamin's photos taken over a decade apart, the region used to be heavily forested and in good health, but recently has suffered extensive forest loss, especially along tidal waterways and at the boundary between marsh and forest. So when Benjamin reached out to the USF College of Marine Science in 2015, looking for an explanation to what he was documenting, he happened to be put in touch with me, a young graduate student working on satellite-based studies of coastal change elsewhere in Florida. Using his photos as reference points, we conducted a study that we then published in a 2018 scientific journal using satellite imagery to monitor and quantify the loss of forest in this red highlighted subset of the larger Big Bend region, which is outlined in yellow, and which I'll come back to in a few minutes. First, I used photographs captured by airplanes to identify locations of change, as you can see here in this time series from 2006 to 2014, which clearly shows that the forest along this small river was thick and healthy prior to 2010, then experienced a rapid loss of canopy through 2014, at which point the forest was so sparse that the marsh grass is visible beneath it. And here in the two vertical panels are updated versions of those aerial time series plots I just showed, indicating that the forest loss continued through 2019, which is the latest date for which we have aerial photographs of the area as they are collected in targeted acquisitions by the state of Florida. Now, this bird's eye view helps place Benjamin's photos in context with the large-scale pattern of forest loss and confirm that what he was documenting was occurring throughout the region. So the next step was to conduct a change detection analysis using low-resolution satellite imagery from 1982 to 2003 and 2015. The panel on the left here shows in red the decline in forest from 1982 to 2003, and you can see that there's virtually no change at all. The image on the right is the same change map for the period 2003 to 2015, and there's a clear pattern of decline along tidal waterways. But the images from this satellite mission are relatively low quality. They go back a long ways in time, but the resolution is somewhat coarse. So we next improved the assessment with images taken from a state-of-the-art satellite mission. Now the panel on the left shows the same forest loss in red for the period 2010 to 2017, based on that high resolution satellite imagery. As you can see, there's a lot more red pixels because the higher resolution of this satellite can distinguish finer scales of forest loss, sort of like putting on reading glasses to see finer print. And with these higher resolution maps, you can see that the pattern of loss along waterways is consistent, but the pattern now extends to the marsh forest boundary away from those tidal waterways. suggesting that the loss of forest is driven by something other than direct surface saltwater influx. So to understand these changes, we collected as much environmental data as we could, including stream gauge data recording gauge height, river discharge, as well as rainfall patterns and other data from the region, but none of those variables indicated patterns that were consistent with the loss of forest. The only consistent driver is sea level rise, as shown here for the only long-term tide gauge in the region located at Cedar Key, which is roughly in the middle of the Big Bend. As you can see from the blue line cutting across the data, the long-term trend from around 1940 to 2017 is about 2 millimeters per year, which is consistent with the global long-term average. However, there is an acceleration beginning around the year 2000 that equates to a rate of about 9 millimeters per year since then. And if we further assess the rate since 2010, that rate increases to 12 millimeters per year. To be clear, this finding was not new for our study. Sea level rise is well studied in this region, and it's been long predicted that the rate of rising seas here would accelerate, but the timing is sooner than most have predicted. So we concluded in our paper that sea level rise is the driving force for the loss of forest here, in that rising seas both inundate the low-lying soil, creating soggy conditions in which some forest species will simply fall over if it gets too wet, but also through apparent saltwater intrusion, which is the influx of salt water through the soil itself, and which is difficult to assess from above ground sources. So using satellite imagery to evaluate a proxy for saltwater intrusion is a valuable new tool we have. Now, the next logical step was to scale up that analysis to the entire Big Bend to see if the same patterns are happening elsewhere in the region. Now, this extends beyond Benjamin's photograph area, but the same kind of habitat and ecosystems occurred throughout this entire region. As you can see from the results shown here in the figure on the right, the pattern of forest loss exists throughout the entire coastal area. In addition to the satellite-based forest loss assessment, we also incorporated elevation models to confirm that the loss of forest was greatest along the shore at lower elevations and decreases as elevation increases, which further suggests that the driver is sea level rise, affecting the marsh forest boundary more strongly than forest that is more inland. This research is actually currently in review for publication, and we're hoping to update the assessment with more recent imagery, especially as the area was directly impacted by Tropical Storm Elsa a few weeks ago and Tropical Storm Fred at the moment. And speaking of which, we specifically chose the study period of 2010 to 2016 because there were no major hurricanes impacting this area during that time that might have caused short-term damage that rebounded later. The loss of forest we see has continued and will likely be further exacerbated by storm surge and high winds brought by the recent tropical storm systems. Now, many of you probably saw the recent headlines about the tragic collapse of a beachfront building near Miami. As far as I know, the causes of the collapse are still being evaluated, but the event spurred other buildings in the area to undergo critical structural assessments for vulnerability. Meanwhile, this sparsely populated coastline, known as the Nature Coast, is experiencing a collapse of its own out of the public eye. We're hoping that through venues like this, we can draw attention to this more subtle, but no less destructive ongoing conservation crisis, which might still be largely unknown if it weren't for Benjamin traipsing through the backwater creeks with a camera and a desire to share his experience with the rest of us. And so with that, I'll hand it back to our host, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Hilary, I am going to turn it over to you to get the conversation started.
Okay, is my sound a little better now? Yes? Yes? Okay, grand. Sorry
So much better.
Woo! Technology on the fly over here, but figured it out. So thank you so much to both of you for sharing your important work. I've already got a couple questions coming in from, oh man, a bunch of questions coming in from the chat here, but I wanted to start off with a little bit of a conversation starter for the two of you. And actually, I love that this is the slide that's up right now, because it's sort of the same question, but a slightly different spin for both of you. So for you, Matt, my question is, what are some of the things that you have found to be surprising from the addition of this sort of fine art photography perspective to your work and to you, Benjamin, as an artist and photographer, to have the science added to it?
Well, yeah, this really is an example of art inspiring science. Science is often thought of as a process of crunching data and publishing obscure technical papers that are only read by other scientists. But it really shouldn't be that way. And in fact, I found that most scientists, especially those studying the environment, have a deep personal connection to their research, and they want to share it with the rest of their community. Unfortunately, much of what we do is rather abstract and portrayed through tables and graphs that sever that personal connection. Artwork like Benjamin's is powerful because it maintains that personal perspective, showing anyone who sees it exactly what they would see if they were to travel to these places for themselves. And coupling those dramatic images with these statistical analyses that place them in a broader context is all the more powerful for communicating what's happening, in the hope that with enough awareness, we can come together and do something to stop it.
Thanks, Matt. Benjamin?
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. How has the addition of the scientific perspective, which I know you kind of actively sought out, changed or added an interesting perspective to your work?
I went from being pretty naive to knowing more, and a lot of the research was on my own and by digging around. Matt's work helped me understand it, and I talked to a former what do we call him, water management district. Another one of the people who helps make the decision about how much water gets pulled out of the aquifer for agriculture or development or what have you. And that opened my eyes. It's an ongoing process. I have enjoyed learning more about it. And the last graph of Matt's is, I don't want to call it sexy, but it's great because my friends there who said, I don't know what's going on. I think it's that saltwater intrusion stuff. Well, they were seeing this starting to happen in 2010 when that spike at the end of his graph was happening. And it's allowed me to read things a little bit better and to be able to talk about it, and at this point to have a academic press interested in publishing a book of it, because I'm okay talking. I'm a little better with the writing thing, but much better with the pictures, and that's been rewarding to go through the process. We're far from finished, but it's enlightened me, and that's really what I wanted.
And I've gotten a little sneak peek into some of the text for this publication that'll be coming out, and it's going to be a real treat. So keep your eye out for that, folks. So this question kind of is similar to one that I had thought about, but I'm going to go ahead and go with the one from the chat here. And it's for you, Benjamin, but I think that Matt, we can kind of fold it into your work and, what you're doing as well. But the question is specifically about how your work, Benjamin, is so beautiful, and it doesn't seem to really match with the feeling of alarm, particularly when we're seeing what is happening from the data. Oh, wait, no, sorry. So it's beautiful, and yet it still sort of gives us that sense of what's happening in the same way. Sorry, I read the question wrong. That what we're seeing in Matt's satellite views are, particularly with this comparison of the different years over these 10 to 15 to longer year periods. And the scene of this wounding, is kind of the term that the person uses, it's obvious to even those of us who may be not super familiar with what's happening out there. So do you consider beauty in any ways an ally or a difficulty?
It's maybe a difficulty for other people. It's not for me. I'm not sure I know how to take an ugly photograph. I raised the the viewfinder to my eye, and our function, our job as photographers is to make some order out of what's in front of us. And my predilection is toward ordering it beautifully. So that's what I do. Another layer in this is that this is a place that goes way back for me and my brother who's in the audience. And this is part of my native landscape. As a kid, we would walk around on the mud flats and mangroves and hang out in the oak trees and build second homes. And these are the first things I photographed when I was given a little Instamatic camera or Brownie. And as this is sinking into the Gulf or being flooded over by the Gulf, I am not eulogizing, but actually it's an elegy. I would rather say something nicely about it or say something beautiful than to try to make a point by by intentionally making an ugly photograph.
Thanks. Matt, I have a bit of a science question for you here. Actually, there are a couple science questions that I'm going to bounce back and forth to. Can these landscapes burn is a question that came in from the chat, if they're prone to fire. I mean, they're on water. We don't think about fire necessarily being on water, though, again, the ocean was on fire recently thanks to the oil rig issue.
Yes, I don't think that these areas typically experience the large-scale wildfires that we see elsewhere, and including in areas in Florida, especially in the inland pine areas. But yes, they can burn, although the more inundation that we get, the less likely they will be to burn.
And why would that be, Matt? Because the soil is saturated?
Right, yeah, as long as there's saturation in the soil of water, then you're less likely to have the plant material itself dry out to become the tinder that you really need to spark those fires.
So this is actually a question, Benjamin, that came up during our docent training. So we're excited to be able to ask it. It came in totally separately from someone in the chat as well here, but it's come up twice now. And these comparative images spaced apart, the reflections are quite dramatic from what you see in the water. Is that something that you factor in when you want to express something in particular in an image, or is it just what's happening that day on the water? Because it often seems like it's more of a calm day paired with a day with a bit more disturbance or rippling on the surface of the water itself, both in the before and after, depending on the pair.
I'm glancing past you at one on here, and it's quite true. It's completely unintentional. This is a remote place, an hour, now it's only an hour or an hour and a half. Back in the day when my brother and I first went up there with Tim Frost, it was 2 or 3 hours, at least 2.5 hours on US 19, stop and go traffic. Anyway, it's remote. And then you get in a boat and go maybe 20 to 30 minutes, and I have to shoot what's going on then and there. And if it's a lousy day with flat light, I use certain filters for my camera, gelatin filters that will increase contrast. I can't change what's going on. I don't have a polarizing filter for my Hasselblad, so I can't use that to try and match an old shot's water reflection with a new one. I have to shoot what's there, and it's purely coincidental. There are some factors that if it's a really bright day, I can shoot at a higher shutter speed, which will not have as much blur on the water. If it's a dull day with not a lot of light, then the water will be moving in the foreground.
All right, thanks for answering that question. It's totally true that it's out of our control with the weather, particularly when you're down on the coast like that. It seems like there are totally different rules for what happens weather-wise on the coast. It'll be storming a mile inland and beautiful when you're on the water. So,
and it's very helpful to have satellite radio so that you know when something is coming in. And that happened to us a couple of years ago, and we knew it was coming and woke up and the water was all the way up under the dock and flooded back into the Serengeti, into the under the house. And we waited till it was finished instead of going back to the ramp in rain, which really hurts when you're going fast in an open boat.
Yeah. So this is a question for Matt, but I think from someone who spends a lot of time very much so on the ground observing, you might be able to answer the second part of what you might see, of this question of what you might see happening. So the question is, are there other salt-tolerant trees that will eventually come in to displace the trees that are dying? And what animal wildlife is impacted by this tragic process? So I guess, Benjamin, if you have any observations about the wildlife in particular, I'd love to hear about that after Matt answers the sort of ecology part of the question with the tree displacement.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not just trees that we should consider about replacing and displacing trees that are dying. So first of all, what you saw in a lot of Benjamin's photos is actually that there used to be a diversity of tree species in his early photos, and then more recently, what you primarily see is these sable palms, and they are very salt tolerant, and they're kind of the last stand that's making it there. That's kind of what's left in the area right now. What might eventually happen is we could see mangroves taking hold in this area. There are mangroves all throughout the west coast of Florida, even moving now up into the Panhandle, and so it's possible that they'll move in here. But it's not just trees that provide valuable habitat for a variety of ecosystems. What's typically happening in this area is you get the marsh grass that Benjamin showed us some photos of. That just moves in and replaces the trees. And that's not, a valueless ecosystem. That brings all kinds of animals with it. And so this isn't necessarily a loss of an ecosystem. It's more like a warning for those who live there, those who work there, especially those who work in the fishing tourism business. We often see signs that say, save the earth. The earth is doing just fine. The earth will go on ticking just fine, whether we're here or not. It's the issue that we're really highlighting here is about conserving what we have today so that we can enjoy it, so that our children can enjoy it as it is. And Benjamin, I'll pass it over to you. You've probably seen more of the wildlife out there than I have.
Thank you, Matt. The mangroves are happening now, and I've been going up there since the mid 80s, and have never seen mangroves growing as thickly as they are now, and along the shores of all the creeks and smaller creeks. And for those of you who don't know, it's mangroves are a good thing, but they crave, they like brackish, and when they get a hold on a shoreline, it becomes their place. And that's the only downside to this is that they are not frost tolerant, and they will die if there are frosts up there. And it often doesn't freeze as far north as Brooksville, which is roughly the parallel with Chazawiska. But on the other hand, it's not freezing very much anymore because of global warming. The thing that I've observed just in March that made my little tiny cold dark heart feel all warm and fuzzy was up in dead bay trees across the creek. from the cabin was a large nest, and it was they were ospreys, and they were huge, and they're using the dead trees to roost in, and they're still able to find fish. That cycle, if they can't find food, they'll move on. But that's still intact, and I have a memory of just a couple of years ago photographing off the dock in the morning, looking at a foggy scene from the dock and hearing some crunching in my ear, and it wasn't eardrum damage from headphones. It was actually a otter who don't care a flip about people, about 10 yards away from me, eating mussels and crunching them with his teeth. And he will be there until there aren't any more mussels for him to eat, is kind of the way I see this. And it will become a salt marsh, and there will be homes for some things there that aren't there now. So it is that was what this gesture is. It's change, it's an evolution, and it's an unfortunate one. And another aspect that you hinted at, Matt, is that hurricanes will continue to make life more miserable and more miserable for the people along the coast. This is an extremely flat shoreline, and the storms will, as they get worse and worse, and that's what we're experiencing here, will shove salt water way, way up into the lower elevations.
I feel like you're getting the science pretty good under your belt there.
Well, you have a lot of time to think and observe. I've been shooting there, what did I say, since the mid 80s and watching change.
Yeah. Well, speaking of all of that wonderful photography that you've done over the years, I've got a multi-part question that is about sort of your process, but I'll start with the first one sort of in the series here of 4 questions that have come in from this person. What drives you to use black and white instead of color in this clearly very rich and colorful area of the world?
Lots of answers to that question. First of all, there's a tradition. I mean, I have my own personal reasons. It's how I see, and it's what I've been doing for 50 years, shooting black and white film. It is I'm happy with going against the standard practice, but it is how landscape photographers tend to work. The public domain exhibit is 2 color photographers, John Fall and Robert Glenn Ketchum, and everybody else is black and white. So it's kind of how we roll. And somewhere on my screen behind a couple of other things is a quote from Alison Nordstrom, Dr. Nordstrom, who's writing a long essay in the book, talking about using black and white as a way to abstract things and the scene in front of you. And that's really what I do. I don't go and shoot super close-ups, except maybe with one exception of the collapsed palm sapling. And it's how most of us work. I could shoot digitally and instead of with film, but if I were to shoot digitally, I would also convert it to black and white.
Well, that kind of answers the 4th part of the question too, which was how monochrome choices change the story that you're telling. And I think this point of sort of abstraction is an important one, and that I think it, maybe allows also a different way to take critical eye to the scene at hand. I mean, I think color offers options, but there is something that happens when you reduce something down to those lines and tones.
And color actually is unnecessary noise. And really with color and digital photography now, if you don't like that color of green, or if you want to make those leaves look like they're dead, then you select the leaves and change them from green to brown, or just take branches in Photoshop, take the branches off the trees.
And I think it's important for, folks who are interested in photography, because, we got a lot of questions about photography processes and all of that, to note that you still shoot film and work in the darkroom, that you don't. Although another part of this multi-part question was whether you preview your shots with a digital camera or a phone. Nope.
No, I used to bring the digital camera with me, but it just slowed me down. Why do I have it? If I have it, I should use it to do what? Oh, to take pictures of your camera already set up over there. And then, so I just bring the phone. And if I want to take a snapshot, I use the phone like everybody else.
So when you've made, or you're making a shot, or when you're working with your developed film, once you've got your negatives and all of that, what do you look for and what do you reject when you're selecting a shot? And side note, has that been affected since you've started working closely with Matt?
Matt, I'm sorry, it hasn't.
That's okay.
And because he hasn't changed his scientific study process either, I don't believe. It's difficult. It's very akin to the process when you're shooting from the canoe or standing with the tripod. Where have I said what I want to say? And in which frame? I tend not to shoot multiple frames of anything. Unless I'm shooting from the canoe, because it moves with the current, and sometimes I'm shooting backwards because behind me, because what I wanted was there and the wind blew me downriver. So in that case, it's pretty easy to find the shot that I want. That's difficult to describe, and as a middle-aged straight white man, I'm not in touch with my feelings, or I don't have feelings. So it's difficult to actually say, but it is one of the funnest parts of the process is looking at your contact sheets and saying yes to this and no to that. Ultimately, the real acid test is making quick prints of various frames to get a sense of how it looks on paper.
Thanks. I've got another question for Matt, and then one sort of final question for the two of you as we get towards the end of our time together. Have there been any changes in the water management of the sort of Florida coastal area based on these studies?
Not that I know of. As you've probably all seen, Florida is dealing with a different kind of crisis these days. What I will say is that so the publication that I mentioned earlier was kind of that small scale Chazahuitzka region. We actually have one now, probably coming out in the fall as a scientific manuscript that'll be published for the entire Big Bend. That was that last figure that I showed. And then we also, Benjamin and I just partnered again on a magazine article that's hopefully going to be printed in a magazine distributed throughout Florida to kind of spread the word on this issue, because it's really not very well known at this point. And Florida kind of has a history of not dealing with its water issues very well, in part because it has so much water. The problem, though, is that a lot of Florida's water, a lot of Floridians get their water from an aquifer. And that aquifer can be drained just as it can be drained out in California by agriculture. And there's one thing I'll point out that you won't hear anywhere else. There's sort of a working hypothesis going on regarding this work based on some really interesting data that we found in the stream gauges along this coastal area of the Big Bend. We've actually seen in these streams, which are mostly fed by springs, we've seen an increase in fresh water. The water is getting fresher, not saltier. And the only explanation that I've been able to come up with talking with other oceanographers and ecologists is that what's happening is the salt water from the ocean is pushing in through the soil, so underneath the overlying soil and the landscape. and it's interacting with the aquifer and actually forcing that fresh water up into the spring faster than it would be if the ocean wasn't rising. And so in essence, the aquifers are probably losing that fresh water faster than they have in the past. And that could create sort of a double whammy as far as a water crisis goes in Florida. And we're hoping that by raising awareness about this issue and possibly reaching out to politicians in Florida, we can, help them address this issue before it becomes a crisis.
I actually lied. I have one of my own questions before I get to our last question from the audience, which I think is a great question. But are there any artists or activists or researchers working in this area of sort of environmentalism that are particularly inspiring or exciting to either of you that you want to share with our audience so that they can look into them after tonight's presentation?
Go ahead, Benjamin.
I would say that I will say that there is a young woman whose mother I knew from New York who has gone to the Arctic and the Antarctic and made photograph studies and comes back and does pastel drawings, and they're gigantic pastel drawings. And she has a huge Instagram following, and her name is Zaria Foreman, and they're beautiful, and she's doing the right thing with them. I've been following her for years. And I'm thinking about Suzanne Simard, who is writing about trees and the ways in which they communicate with each other, which I find fascinating. And that comes into what I'm thinking about with this work, because this whole area had all the cypress harvested from it 100 years ago, and now this whole area is losing all of its trees again, or 100% of its trees. And I wonder what the conversations are like between the trees, just because now we know that they chat with each other through the soil and through the air. There are some photographers whose work I like that are dealing somewhat with this, not so much climate change, but the environment. Richard Misrak, Mizrak. Sebastião Salgado is a larger view that brings in economics and social issues. And boy, there was the third one that went into my mind and out, Misrak. I would also say Greta Thunberg is someone who's speaking very well. I haven't heard much of her in a while. And there's another group that I would mention that's doing very good things in Florida, and that's the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which has gotten Ron DeSantis to actually sign legislation that sets aside money to preserve wild spaces in the state. And that's a very huge thing, because it was loved by a lot of the people, but the past couple of Republican administrations really just gave it lip service. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. Matt, anybody you want to name drop?
Yeah, I actually don't usually think of individuals, but if anybody here would like to look up more information, I'd recommend the Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, or FWRI. They do a lot of work in sea level rise and coastal forest issues. But as far as the climate scientists, most of us prefer to let the work speak for itself. We don't want to become the story. But I would say that I do get inspiration from someone. That's my son. He just turned 1. He could not be farther from a climate activist, but he and his generation will inherit what we leave behind. And so doing what I can to make sure that there's a safe, secure, and healthy planet for him inspires me more than anything.
Well, those are definitely some names and things to look into if you want to know more. And so our final thing here is someone noticed that the collaboration between artist and scientist is extremely powerful, as we've experienced tonight. Do the two of you stay in touch with each other regularly and plan to continue informing each other of what you're working on?
What's funny is I reached out and ended up communicating with Matt in 2015 or 16.
15.
Okay. We finally met at the museum.
Yes, this exhibition finally brought the two of them together, which my cold, dark heart is warmed by.
So that was an opportunity for him to see the work. That was over with very quickly, and we looked at the rest of the exhibit, and then went up to the cafe in the museum and talked for quite a long time. And I enjoyed that. Will we work again? I'm happy to. I'm hoping that we can take this work and a book and go down to USF in St. Petersburg, University of South Florida's Marine Science campus, and share the work down there.
Right, and as I mentioned, we're working on a magazine article now, and Benjamin and I have already talked a little bit about extending this work. He's already planning on going back and obviously continuing to do the work he's been doing. And I'd love to partner those landscape photographs with more updated satellite analyses to keep monitoring the situation.
Well, thank you so much to our artist tonight, Benjamin Dimmitt, and our scientist, Matt McCarthy, for collaborating on this evening's program with me and for collaborating with each other to bring us this amazing insight into what is happening in this world that we are all living in and that we all are responsible for. Though I wish we could have hosted the event here in person, it's been a great virtual evening with folks joining us from, I think, all over the country, it sounds like, which is one of those special things about being able to do things this way. And we're so grateful for both of your time. So I'm going to turn things back over to Christy to wrap it up for us this evening.
Great. Thanks to Benjamin, Matt, Hilary, and all of you for joining us tonight virtually. We'll be sending out an evaluation to collect your feedback on this evening's program, so please watch your email. The museum is currently open to visitors with COVID-19 safety measures in place. You can learn more about those safety measures as well as our current and upcoming exhibitions, including public domain, virtual programs, and small group in-person offerings at ashevilleart.org. And if you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider making a donation to our annual fund or becoming a museum member. We hope to see you in the galleries or at another virtual program through our Museum from Home initiative. Thank you all for your support. Stay well and have a great rest of your week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.